Hello, everyone. Welcome to CTN. To learn more about the show, please visit ciotalknetwork.com. And today's topic is operational brilliance in the age of disruption. So what we are talking about here is there's so much going on right now, and there have been global disruption, pandemic, wars, other socioeconomic and political issues. I mean, there's so much, way too much going on. And then you've had organizations saying, you know what, we want to bounce back. We want to become efficient. We want to be profitable. And we have to be able to become resilient, because what we saw in the last few years really shook us up. And we said, we got to be adaptable. We have to be resilient. Now, with all of that said, if you have such a volatile environment, can we have our operations become such that we could pivot quickly if anything which is not expected happens? And or anything which we have to do to get to the next level. So it's not always the doomsday, it is more about the growth orientation or working or living with hope. If we had to go with that mindset and if we had to pivot as needed, can we do that? What would it take? What are the strategies organizations are using? And I could not have had a better guest than Greg Flanik. He's the Chief Operations Officer with Baldwin Wallace University. Hey, Greg, how are you?
I'm doing well. How about yourself?
Very good. Thank you so much for joining. So since you come from that background, Chief Operations Officer, and interestingly, you also have been a CIO. So you are on CIO Talk Network. That makes it a good fit right away. Plus, of course, we have the privilege of you having lived the Chief Operations Officer role, which tells you what on the ground is happening and what needs to get done. So now, with that as your background, when you're looking at these global disruptions that we all have seen, what would you say would be some of the initial adjustments did you actually try to make in your organization so that that really helps you pivot as needed and also get going in a progressive path as you implement these strategies as the business changes around you?
It's a great question. When you look at all the disruptions that have happened in the past couple decades, be it pandemics, wars, economic crisis, the theme I often pull away is the human will is resilient and they will find ways. And the key driver for us is, how do we use technology in a way that enables human resiliency, anticipate and sense their needs so that they are able to take action when they want to take action? Society has become very transactional and just in time. And in a university environment, which is the background I'm in, it's no longer the we're open from 8 to 5. It's we're open all the time, and learning can take place at any time. And so for us, it's how do we develop systems, processes, and incorporate the people into that, and to a large degree, culture, and make the technology solution seamless to the user so that when a need arises, it's right at their fingertips. It allows them to respond in a way that will fulfill their need, and get them a solution or answer so that they can continue on. We often say the technology and the solution has to almost be as transparent as turning on a light switch. When we flick that switch, we don't necessarily think about the electric current that's going to travel through the wires and either illuminate a light bulb or power on what it is. We see that as an extension to what we're doing at that time. And technology and operations needs to be that way for users, because the only time people will notice us is when they flip that switch and it doesn't work. And then it's immediate frustration. And so the challenge is, how do we always stay always on, responsive, so that the user, the customer, the potential customer, needs are anticipated and they're able to get the answers and the solution or the transaction that they need done at that time.
What you said also true for operations, and then I've heard the same thing from even the technology leaders, right? And you lived both roles. Did you use some of your experiences in managing technology into operations And since you had kind of a dual role, or you had that role reporting to you, were you able to do something new, more or different and creative to be able to have a nimble operations backbone, if you will, that you could do better than the others, given the environment we are in?
Um, I think a lot of it has just been based on experience. And I think that, being a little bit risk adverse helps, because that's where the competitive advantage is at the end of the day. You have to take a little bit of a risk on some things and be willing to be agile with that. Because if you put all your eggs in one basket and you try something and you completely fail and you don't have a backup or a pivot point, you can get yourself in a lot of trouble fast, especially if you're leading a large team. But I think one of the things that I like to do is enable the team to be agile and to take a chance. And this is where I have maybe I bring a little bit of my sports or athletic background. When you're in the heat of a battle or in competition, everyone has a game plan. But sometimes the opponent or the environment has a game plan that's a little bit better than yours. And you have a way to respond to it. And you have to trust that you're going to be able to pivot with something you haven't necessarily had a chance to practice all that much, but you're going to give it a shot and take a little bit of a risk. And so there have been times where I think during the pandemic, we were challenged that way. Before the pandemic started at our university, I would say maybe 25% of our instructors dabbled in online learning, which meant 75% never touched the technology. In 2 weeks, from the time, where we live here, we're located in Cleveland, Ohio, and our state and our governor was the first one to actually shut down, the state and kind of go into that lockdown mode. So we had about 2 weeks to get the 75% of our instructors ready to teach in an online format to keep the organization, the business function of education viable for the university and for our tuition paying students to be able to deliver those courses in a degree that they needed. And so I had to lean on the team to be creative, how we were not going to be face to face with these individuals, but we were actually going to use the very technology that we wanted them to teach with to not only learn it, but then to deliver the education for the next 17 weeks of those courses that were coming up. And I was really amazed of the creativity, the empowerment of those individuals to be able to pivot in that moment. And if you would have told me 5 years ago, there was going to be a day where 100% of your faculty are going to teach an online course, I would have said, strap that person in a straitjacket. They're going crazy. But it happened and they did it. And I think it speaks to what I talked about in the beginning, the resiliency of the human will. There was a willingness, and they know, to survive and for the organization to persist and for them to continue teaching through this pandemic. It was a skill set they needed to master and master very quickly. And the team was innovative in their use of the technology and showing them, here is how you can teach and get comfortable with this environment. The first week wasn't 100% perfect, but I would say it was probably about 85-90%. People learned to be agile. They learned to be patient with technology, and they adjusted and they adapted. Coming out of it now, it's a way of life. And it's interesting. I hear to this day, there's some instructors who teach in the classroom Monday and Wednesday, and then it's Friday. Hey, we're going to be remote that day. And they still use it. And these were instructors that were in that 75% who said, I'm never going to teach an online course. So it just speaks to the growth and the learning that's happened and kind of the transformation that's happening right now in our industry.
Now, the way you explain, I think there was quite a transformation that happened within your organization, and I would say globally, where a lot of people who were never used to doing things online, they ended up doing so. and they learned a lesson that it's not impossible. And in fact, it allows them to become more flexible. So all that has happened quite a few years, like not say quite a few, but 3 to 4 years ago. Would you say now you're done and dusted? In the sense, whatever changes you had to bring about in the mindset of the people, whether from the academic side or the technology side or operations side, and even the student community, or there is more resilience that needs to be built, more pivoting that is pending for, or at least building that new muscle. Some more muscles are to be built for us to be able to tackle what we are dealing with today. Or is it business as usual for you now?
I wouldn't say it's business as usual, and I wouldn't say it's finished. I think there's still kind of a mix of art and science on how to manage and build remote teams and work on it. And I don't know if it's been perfected yet. I think the human will has figured out the technology and workarounds for things. But, as you hear about organizations being hybrid or fully remote, it's what investment are they making in the people side to teach managers and business leaders to build those remote teams. Some organizations have been doing this well before the pandemic, and they've been a remote organizations. But for some of the companies that have always been in office, it is a skill set to manage remote teams, especially when you're bringing new people into the organization who may not be familiar with that type of environment. How do you make them feel welcome? How do you make them feel engaged? How do you make them feel connected to the organization? It's a challenge that we run up against, because when we did remote here, our IT organization, we let some of our IT staff stay fully remote well after the pandemic, even to this day. And it's worked well. We have brought in a handful of people from the outside, and we have found that by bringing them here to campus every now and again, it helps them feel connected to the organization. It helps them build that team environment. I don't know if we'd be as successful if we were going across state lines, where someone that wouldn't be as easy for them to get here and work on our teams. And I think that's still a challenge out there. And it's interesting because you have seen and heard companies where they said, you know what, the remote hybrid experience isn't working for us, so everyone's coming back to the office. And I think those are the ones that depended on the technology to solve the solution, but didn't invest in the people skills or the training skills on how to run a meeting when you have some of your workforce here in the room and some of your workforce remote. I can tell you that I've read a lot, and those meetings are incredibly draining, because it is so easy to focus on the people in the room and ignore the people remotely. And sometimes the opposite happens too. And it's, how do you build that synergy between the teams and get them creative and get them working together to get, to allow them to create the best work of their career and develop solutions for the organization. And so from my standpoint, I still think there's an opportunity for us to work on the art and science of the human component of remote and hybrid work. And I think you're seeing some companies throw in the towel because they said this investment isn't one we want to make, and we want everyone in the office. And I do think you lose a little with that. I think there is something to be said with hybrid and remote. I continue to see tremendous productivity from our teams that do it versus having some folks in the office. And I understand there's folks out there that'll say, well, how do you know they're working, when they're remote? And I use the question, how do you know they're really working when they're in the office? Yes, you can pop your head and look at them, but what are they really doing? There are all sorts of distractions out there. So, for us from an operational standpoint, I think you build diversity and diverse perspectives by being able to have a hybrid workforce and even a fully remote workforce. And so those are things that we're going to continue to experiment and make some of those risk investments on to see if it can give us a competitive advantage.
It's a great segue for the people side, right? So one is we talk about remote and in person and how people or humans behave. The second is the talent part of it. So one is the mindset, another is the core talent that you want to keep and or develop within the organization. And keeping the operational aspect, not just tech, but across the organization, you got to keep the business humming, right? What have you attempted to do to make sure that the talent is at par, or if not, it should at least exceed, I would not even say at par, but exceed what you need today, because things are not going to get any easier. I mean, we hope so, but it doesn't look like it with all the turbulence that you see happening. So were the people in operations, for example, let's take that component of the talent. They were never trained for disruption happening every next day and having to deal with. So are you looking at different measures of what a talent should be in operations now and accordingly developing them?
Definitely, technology is becoming pervasive throughout the organization. I think we well past graduated from IT as the tech voice in the organization. I think if you have a mature organization today, technology should be being driven from your business leaders, your functional business leaders, to the IT department. Here's what we need. Here are the capabilities our teams need. And I think as technology and operations leaders, our job is to see beyond the business leader silo and think across the organization on how this technology will help. One of the things that we're looking at in the university environment is what role artificial intelligence will play, not only in the classroom, but more on the operations side of the university. How can we take data analytics and look at student movement patterns around campus to influence, where they hang out? How do we perhaps use and elevate our dining offering to cater to students where they tend to spend their idle time? When the weather's bad and we have snow here in Cleveland, what is the preferred route on campus to plow based on where students are walking and traveling? And a lot of that information can be garnered from your data. I think AI is going to help bridge the gap between data analytics and predictive analytics, because analytics in and of itself, I like to describe it as a lab environment. Our business leaders, when we're recruiting students, so often say, what does the data say? What does it predict in terms of student enrollment? And you can create some great marketing and sales applications and stuff and tweak those programs in such a way where it entices the customer. And then you could use the data analytics to say, well, if we do this again in a slightly different way, it might drive more yield. The problem with that environment is it doesn't factor in inflation. It doesn't factor in a recession. It doesn't factor in a pandemic or a war that's happening overseas and what that might do to the economy. And this is where I think artificial intelligence, bridging it with AI, can help build risk adverse projections and things to consider and alternate paths. Because if you just get wrapped up in the data science component, again, it's a lab environment, it's a controlled environment, but there are so many extraneous variables to bring into the picture. I think different artificial intelligence models could really help inform business leaders to make better decisions along with the human component. And so from an operations standpoint, it's finding talent that sees these opportunities, finding talent that understands what data points are important for the organization to collect, how to use them in a way that is going to be meaningful to business leaders and drive business outcomes and drive strategy. And I think utilizing AI can help us get to the answer a little bit faster and more efficiently, and perhaps with fewer resources, to actually crunch the numbers, and more opportunity to put people on the ground to help serve our students, our customers, and business leaders to help drive change in the organization. Because, one of my favorite examples at a conference many years ago was the evolution of music. And this is how I speak to the rate of change that's going on there. Music, when we first started listening to music, it was on a cylinder, and the cylinder would spin, and then it went from a cylinder to a record. And the record lasted a really long time, but it was hard to, the needle would skip. So then we went to the 8-track and the cassette, and those lasted for a really long time, but it didn't have indexing capability. So out came the CD, and now we can jump to the song. We still had to buy the 11 lousy songs on the CD to get that one good one that we wanted to listen to, but we had a way to get to it quicker. Then the illegal music market came out, Napster, and we were able to grab onto that technology. And now that today we don't go to the music store to buy cassettes and CDs and records really anymore unless we want the novelty experience. We rent the songs. We don't even own them, and we can play them and build playlists on demand. What's interesting, though, about that evolution of music is every time we jump to a new medium, the gap of time between that and the previous medium has shrunk. If you look at how long the record was out compared to where we are at with Spotify and Apple Music and all the other products that we can choose from today, the time gap has gotten so much smaller. And that's just the rate of change that's happened in the music industry. What about the media industry? What about the industries we're in? Are we paying attention to that rate of change? And we need to anticipate that when we're building our teams and we're recruiting people to understand that, hey, don't get comfortable, because in 3 years, whatever you're doing today, it's going to be completely different, because that's the rate of change that we're having to move at today.
Your response is so good. And at the same time, I also feel that, you got to this position because you had this mindset, because you could navigate through uncertainty and do what you had to do. But if you look at the average, I would not say average, I'm sure you're hiring good talent, and there is a culture that plays into it. And then at the same time, the leadership style, which will allow them to start thinking like you, or someone who is progressive, who embraces uncertainty. And that's, you're not born with it. Sometimes you are, but most of the time it's the nurture. So what do you think has happened within your organization, or what you're seeing in some of the organizations who have demonstrated that their people have stepped up voluntarily to embrace uncertainty and say, you know what, we are by your side, versus you having to shepherd them? In leadership and culture development context, what have you tried, and what are some of the mantras that you've seen have proven to be the right ones, so that you can build this operational, brilliance, if you will, in this age of disruption?
I wish there was a magic sauce.
There is none, so that's why I'm asking if you found something to be true.
Yeah, I think what it is just putting incredible trust. What I do when I either inherit a team or I have an opportunity to build a team is I use an athletic mindset, because I grew up playing sports, and I love team sports and I loved individual sports. And what I learned about individual sports and how it translates to team sports is, at an individual level, you get as much reward and satisfaction out of the sport you're doing based on the amount of effort and time you spend practicing, putting into it. And so when I recruit people, I'm more interested in how much time and effort they've put into their craft. Is it a hobby for them? Is it something they find fun? Or it's like, well, I went to school here, I did this there, I went on and did this. I'm looking for passion And I'm looking for evidence of where they put their trust in others. Because when you take those individual skill sets and you apply it to a team, the great teams are ones that have other informal leaders around them that aren't easily recognized. I mean, when we get into these C-level positions, there's an accountability factor, and I think with that comes some attention, good, bad, or indifferent. But the reality is we don't get to these roles unless we put trust and faith into the individuals who lift us up on a daily basis. And I think the good leaders are the ones who recognize they're not going to get there unless they're able to develop the people underneath them to do amazing things, and then have the trust to step back and allow them to do those amazing things. And that's how you build credibility as a leader. And it also allows the individuals to develop, because at the end of the day, regardless of what organization we work for, the goal is to have the organization persist. The organization exists on behalf of the people it serves, not the people. It doesn't exist to support the people working in it. And I look for people with that mindset of service, trust, creativity, innovation. And those, I think, are key aspects. There are some people on teams who are very excellent at what they do, but they don't aspire to be in a leadership role. And that's okay. I think as a leader, if you recognize that and you understand that this is the role they want to play, then put them in that role and let them succeed. I had an individual, and they're still on my team today, extremely talented and just a remarkable skill set at what they do. They were brought in to be a manager and a director when our previous CIO left and I was in that role. This individual had come to me and said, I really love what I do, but the one part about my job, and this was during our annual performance review, I said, what's my question to them was, what's the one thing I can do better for you as a leader? And they said, recognize the fact that I don't like being a manager or a leader, but I feel like I'm extremely valuable to the organization with my technical skill sets. And if there's a way you can put me in a senior technical role where I can contribute to the team that way versus being a leader, and managing people, I would be happier in the organization. Now, I think a lot of people would hear that and be like, oh my God, we got to get this person out of the organization. Everyone should aspire to be a leader and a manager and want to work their way up the ladder. And I took the different approach. I was like, this is a teammate coming to me that's saying, hey, coach, I think I could better serve the team over in this function, in this role, and I can give you more production and output. I listened to that and we made that move. That person is thriving and flourishing. That organizational business function is doing great things because of that individual in that role. And then we took someone who aspired to be more of a manager and motivator and swapped those roles out. And it's worked really well. I think it's very important for leaders to be in tune to their team. And lining up the skill sets. And so as you build an organization and you're building challenges for strategy, look at your bench and say, is this, it's just like every year if you follow professional sports or college sports, do we have what it takes to compete? And if we don't, what options do we have to fill those gaps? Do we have suppliers or vendors or outsourcing that we could utilize to help augment that team? Is there an opportunity to bring in more talent? Is it time to look at this team and cut some people from the roster to bring in better talent and stuff? I think as you get into these leadership roles and manager roles, we are head coaches constantly assessing the health and well-being of our team and looking to see if they meet and align with an organization's strategy. And we have to anticipate when the strategy is going to change, and is that team still the right team to address that strategy? because you can't get comfortable operating the way you are, because the customer needs and demands are going to change, just like the evolution of the record to the tape to the CD to streaming media. If I were to launch a record store today, I don't think I'd be very profitable. And if I was comfortable running a streaming media company today, I don't know if my business model will persist, because there's going to be another iteration in that market that's going to do something differently in the next 3 to 4 years, that's going to appeal to consumers. And those industries are going to have to be able to pivot quick. And the question is your team positioned to pivot?
Now, when you say this, and we have been talking about technology as the very DNA, have you been able to leverage any of the newer innovations that are happening in technology to bring that resilience and brilliance in the operations specifically?
Yeah, I think, this goes back to artificial intelligence and encouraging people to play with the technology, and look at it in ways that can inspire some creativity. So I'll give you some examples. Uh, just off the top of my head, three of the teams I manage that are the furthest from IT, which is one of the other teams that I have under my portfolio. I have buildings and grounds, I have dining services, and I have safety and security. If we look at AI, um, our safety and security team could put in scenarios to have AI inform it what are better methods to protect the campus or campus events, and give them ideas on how to leverage a security strategy, or a response strategy to a crisis or an event. AI is a very powerful scenario planning tool for security forces. On the dining and catering side, it does a great job with calculating, output for folks coming to an event, innovating recipes and ideas to make food more tasteful for folks and appealing, and perhaps drive sales with ingredients that we have left over in a kitchen. And then from a buildings and grounds standpoint, with all our equipment now becoming sensor enabled, we can take that data and drive predictive maintenance models and progressive maintenance models, and allow us to drive things a lot more efficiently. And again, these are using it, and then, put a holistic layer on top of it. How do you tie those three areas together to deliver what, some people would call a total experience, where you're not only serving your customers, but you're being responsive to the needs of the employees in the organization and the engagement level there. And so there's a good mix of utilizing those technologies in spaces where they aren't traditionally used, but they're driving business outcomes and they're driving customer and workforce experience in ways that we've never imagined before, that are really, really creative.
And when you're looking at, say, beyond technology, right, you got to look at other things that are happening with respect to security and vulnerability. Whenever we are in a state of flux, which could happen when you have a disruption, you're vulnerable, at least the most vulnerable, if things are not kept properly. So while you're trying to build these operations, you also want to run a secure, effective but secure operations. So agility is needed, resilience is needed, but the underpinning should be a secure organizations. Have you been able to do something knowing that these vulnerabilities will keep popping up because
Yes.
of the disruptions?
Yes, and we had our wake-up call almost now 3 years ago. I'll remember the date, the time, and where I was at when I got the call from one of my IT folks that said, "Hey, Greg, remember you said our day will come when, our systems get taken over and we have a ransomware attack." He's like, "Well, that day is today." Um, and we had put a considerable investment in our ability to recover. And at the time, that was where the organization was really comfortable making investment. And so we had a ransomware attack. Um, Luckily, we were able to identify the attackers while it was in progress, and we were able to throw them out of the system. We disconnected from the internet. But after we had done all those steps, they had probably, not physically, but from a digital standpoint, destroyed about 90% of our systems. Just when, instead of focusing on encrypting it and ransoming it, just became destructive because they realized their cover had been blown, and they weren't able to launch all the ransomware. So they became destructive and they started deleting systems and operating systems and files and all sorts of stuff. And they left the organization in a real havoc. Um, we were able to get things back up and running in about 3.5 days from all that fallout. And I understand, at the time, then the average recovery from an attack like that or that nature could be 4 to 6 weeks. And it was during the middle of the school year. So it was, the organization was able to pivot, and teach differently for those 3 days. But business really stopped for us. And what it does is, this happens, I think, in any organization, the business leaders who have heard you saying we need to make investments in cyber and protection, took note. And so we have since made those investments. And now we've actually baked into our procurement process when we bring systems on board. How do we properly secure this? How do we tie it into our overall security strategy? We have a CISO that we have here at the university. We have some folks that are trained and skilled in IT security and endpoint protection. We have a number of contractors that help monitor our environment and watch our systems. And we've employed all the necessary protections that are out there today. But the reality is it's a cat and mouse game. And at some point, one or the other is going to get the upper hand. And it's not a matter of if it's going to happen again, it's when it's going to happen again. And have we built enough resiliency in the organization so that not only the IT team has the game plan to recover, but does the organization have their game plan to keep persisting and recover in the face of something like that? And so we've matured quite a bit as an organization in terms of security since that last event. I'm not going to say we're perfect, but I will say that we've built a culture here now where people don't have a relaxed attitude like they did prior to our last incident. And we've built a culture where there's ongoing training and folks are hyper aware of threats and events that can happen that can really cripple an organization and in some cases put an organization out of business if you're not fully prepared. So there's been a lot of work done in that area, but it's been a culture change and it's not been easy. Security is not always convenient. And I always remind people when you're trying to protect things, there's going to be several extra steps to get to the data you need because of that level of protection, but that's there, to at least dissuade the attackers to find an easier target, or if they are going to ultimately try to get in, we're going to at least try to make them earn it. Knowing that we've done the best with what we have at that point, and then we've continued to build on our strong foundation to recover, is I think our keys. There's a good balance between those three. There's your people, your ability to protect, and your ability to recover that need to have a good balance in an organization these days.
So now that's great that you were able to do things with security, which allowed you to at least keep the fort safe, right?
Mhm.
And so that it can keep running. Now, of course, the leaders also, like the business leaders and other executive management, would be asking, or rather expecting, you and your team to also give the foundation for it to thrive and not just survive, which means whether it is using data or you are using a mindset shift for people to say, you know what, we are not in that survival mode anymore. Yes, we have to be cautious, but then we have to get back to innovating and back to those continuous tinkering and improvements that we have to bring about so that we can become the better version of ourselves every day moving forward. So to do that, how much have you used data analytics? How much have you used change management for a data-driven change management, even or otherwise organic change management, to make sure that you shift from a company which was, of course, dealing with volatility, and that more volatility can come our way. But then now you are more saying we're confident of dealing with volatility and uncertainty, but we are every day making strides towards a positive and a growth-oriented direction, leveraging culture change, organizational change, and data and analytics in any way you can.
I would say it's really building on the foundation of the things that I've talked about, where every day you show up here, our customer base is 18 to 22-year-olds as the foundation of a university, and that group is very demanding with how they use technology, how they consume education, how they use the amenities in the organization, be it the dining halls, the recreational spaces, etc. And you have really one opportunity if you're going to implement an idea or a change to get it right, because you could invest all the money in the world, but if you're not in tune to your customer base, you're going to miss the mark. And so it's not only the investment in technology, it's really the investment in the user experience and getting really laser focused on what they want and what they need. And one of the things that I'm really big on when we do big initiatives and big changes is, be it with a technology adoption or a big process change or bringing a new program in, is let's focus group it with our customer base and make sure we're getting it right. Let's use the data to say, here's what we believe the needs are. Here's what we believe the consumer or the student wants. But now let's pilot this and go out and ask them in a focus group and set up an environment and see, is this something you would really like? And if they gravitate to it, and the technology and the data helps us get some of those early answers to anticipate those needs, if they gravitate to it and we get positive feedback, then it's the organization's ability to take that and scale it. And scale it quickly, and measure it and find out where it's not 100% perfect and be able to relax and pivot to it. Equally important is finding that other activity that the customers have gone away from and figuring out a way to sunset that activity so it's not a financial and a resource drain on the organization. I think there are a lot of organizations out there that do the former first. They're very good at spinning up and proof of concept and scaling things fast. They don't necessarily do a good job at looking at, hey, what is the customer not gravitating to as much anymore, and continuing to make investments that shouldn't be made anymore and scaling that back. They usually wait for the balance sheet to start showing that, and then they start to have to make massive cuts. And I think from an operations standpoint, the way you contribute to the profitability of the organization is you anticipate making those cuts before the organization's asking you to make those cuts. You build that into your process cycle. And I think that's important in using data and analytics and artificial intelligence to help get you there, to help you see those opportunities, but you have to be actively looking for them. And I think that helps put you in a proactive space. You know, I think, if you look at some of the great minds out there in technology, I think they wake up with the attitude of what is not going to change, what is going to remain constant in a human being's life today, and what are humans tending to shun away from doing? And then take a look at your organizational processes and say, yeah, these are the things that my customers are going to want to do, or my students are going to want to do on a daily basis. And these are the things that I need to put investment in, because that's where culture and society is today. But what doesn't fit in this mold? And is that an opportunity to reduce expenses and then take that investment and recapture it and apply it somewhere else before the organization makes cuts? And I think that's how operational leaders and CIOs really can take advantage of a budget, is anticipating those things before someone calls you out on it, because then you have the chance to sunset that technology and reinvest those funds somewhere else versus getting the funds taken away from you altogether as part of cuts. And I often, when I talk to new CIOs who say, hey, I'm kind of strapped in my organization, the IT budget's really tight, there's not a lot of room for growth. I always say, how can you grow your way out of that problem? By getting rid of technologies and then taking the investment you would normally use to maintain that legacy technology or technical debt and reinvest it into something new. Those are ways to grow your way out of, a constrained budget. I'll tell you a case in point, an example. When I became the CIO, everyone on this campus had an inkjet printer on their desk. Horribly inefficient. We know how much ink cartridges cost, and then you multiply that by 400 inkjet printers across campus. What if we centralized to a centralized multifunction printer, copier, scanner device? We removed all those inkjet printers. We leased our multifunction machines. We saved an incredible amount of money, and we were able to invest it in the virtual technology. We took that virtual technology and we started a trend with our students of bring your own technology to campus. And instead of going to computer labs, they connected to virtual desktops. Now we were able to take that hardware investment in computer labs. We didn't have to make it anymore because we cut out computer labs, because people were bringing their own devices and using virtual technology, and we were able to reinvest that money somewhere else before we were told to cut the IT budget. And so, because the IT budget was the same, we grew ourselves out of those challenges and reinvested elsewhere in the organization.
One last question. So what would you say is the kind of muscle or muscles that the operations and technology leaders have to build, given the environment we anticipate we're going to have? More volatile, more disruptions, or anything else which could not be what you expect? So what would be your appeal to them, and what would be your advice to them? How should they proactively prepare for something like that?
Well, in terms of what muscles to exercise or grow, I will equate it to like running a triathlon race. And if you ever looked at like the Ironman triathlon race, and I've had the opportunity to participate and finish in one of those, you're always operating at a level slightly above comfortable, what your body's comfortable doing. So the entire race is just, you feel uncomfortable. You're working at a level that's harder than being comfortable. And I would say that translates to the entire operations environment today. You can't let yourself show up at work every morning and say, everything's great. I'm just going to lean back and just enjoy this moment. Because the minute you do that, you're going to get your head handed to you with the next disruption. I think we all have to be wired with what's coming next. We have to be constantly exercising that model. And this goes back to what I spoke to earlier. Leaders need to be talking to their teams and their managers and the people on the front line and say, what are you seeing happening? what's going on, what's changing, what's different about this year than last year. Those are the best sensors out there, are the people doing the work and on the front lines for you. And it's engaging our people head on and making them part of that solution and part of that change first. And I think those are some great ways to grow change management in an organization. You need to start testing those and doing those proof of concepts that we talked about earlier to see, is this really the case? And if it is, now there's an opportunity we can jump on and capitalize and drive towards quicker change than waiting for the next business magazine or analyst organization to say, hey, you should be looking in this direction. You've already anticipated it because you're listening to not only your customers, but you're listening to the people who are on the front lines and willing to make that change. And I always say when someone in your organization recognizes something that's going wrong and has a suggestion, that could be sometimes the most powerful change management tool there is, because you don't have to push it out there and tell the organization. You've got someone on the front line who's doing it. And if you could leverage that story to the rest of the organization and say, here's what we're seeing, and you've tested it and you're confident in that trend, I think those are some of the most important muscles you can have. I also think by doing that, it invigorates and it rewards people in the organization because they feel valued, because they know their voice is being heard. And it drives the workforce towards that change management mindset, where if organizational leaders consistently ignore those calls or those, hey, we should pay attention to this, and just kind of hold the course, you could be setting yourself up for disaster down the road or more work. And a team that doesn't necessarily feel engaged or inspired to work and support you in your goals and efforts. So I would say those are probably the most important aspects, for building a team and implementing change management and building the muscle and the moxie that's going to be required to move forward. Because if you think about where AI is today and as we get to generative intelligence, which is kind of that next quantum leap, if you think going from the record to Spotify took a while, it's going to shrink that much faster once we get there. And I think the sooner people embrace some of these changes and disruptions that are happening and incorporate it into the organization, the better position they're going to be for careers in the future. This is not a gimmick technology. Find a way to make it work within your organization and apply it in ways that the organization doesn't see possible. I think as our roles as IT leaders and operation leaders are to put working examples and models using the trends that are out there today in front of our business leaders to show them we not only understand what their needs are, but we need to demonstrate, here are things you better anticipate that are coming, because you might have the competitive advantage at the moment, but it will be quickly taken away by someone who's able to leverage this with more capabilities at a much faster rate. And we can't be doing enough of that in our organization.
Once again, thank you so much, Greg, for taking the time for sharing your insights and thoughts about how the organizations can get that operational brilliance in this age of disruption. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It was great to be with you today.
Thank you. And listeners, please connect with us on social media, subscribe to our podcast, watch this video, a lot of nuggets. So I really thank Greg for sharing his insights. Once again, thank you for listening to and watching CTN. This is your host, Sanjog Aul. Till next week, take care and God bless.